Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Good morning. Good morning, members of City Council, ladies and gentlemen in the council chambers. You know, June 1st is right around the corner. This is the time of the year that we look forward to spending time with family as our children, grandchildren, and so forth complete their time in school, and we look forward to family vacations. But it's also the time of the year where we sort of dread, because we know it's the start of hurricane season. And from June 1st through the end of November, we pay very close attention to weather forecasts. We pay very close attention to what's happening in off the coast of Africa and in the Caribbean. And so we can never become complacent and let our guard down, because, as you know, it only takes one storm to cause substantial havoc and destruction and loss of life in a community. And so I'm going to have Chief Ryan Lamb come to the podium and lead you through a discussion this morning on what you can expect for this year's hurricane season. Chief Lamb.
Good morning, Mayor and Council. Ryan Lamb, Fire Chief. I also serve as the Emergency Management Director here for the city. So every year, as we look towards hurricane season, as the City Manager mentioned, we can then project a busy season, we could project a slow season, but if it's a busy season and they all miss us, it's good. If we have one hurricane and it hits us, it's a bad year. So when we look at these projections, we take it with a little bit of a grain of salt, but certainly every year, while we are a all hazards department, we look at making sure we're prepared for cyber attacks, to tornadoes, all these other things. We want to make sure our predominant threat, largest threat to our community, is hurricanes. So we want to make sure we are prepared for that. And so every year, I've never been on a perfect incident. I've never been on a perfect hurricane response, but we always try to continuously improve. We try to tweak every year to make sure that we are providing the best service that we can as we get additional resources or some of the variables change across our community, to make sure we're putting our best foot forward. And I would certainly say that with what we've got from our emergency management staff, the rest of our city staff, and even our community partners that you're going to hear from today, it is truly a whole community approach that we are taking to responding and preparing for these hurricanes, to making sure that we are as ready as we can be. If I get the slides up. So just a bit of a graph here. So certainly we are preparing year-round. A lot of folks sometimes ask, what is emergency management doing when it's not hurricane season? This is when they get all the work done. It's when we put all the plans in place, build all the plans, get the agreements in place. But certainly, as you look at this, if we see a threat coming at 96 hours, 72 hours, 48 hours, 24 hours, those are trigger points for us for decision making based off of the severity of the storm and its projected path. When that disaster occurs, we have that immediate response, that short-term impact that we're looking at of taking care of those immediate life threats. Then we get out to some of the long-term or the intermediate things, which takes weeks to months, some of the cleanup, as we deal with debris and some of those other pieces that will impact our community. And then into the long term as we look at the financial recovery of our community. And that's an important part that we have to make sure we don't forget, is the financial impact that these storms will have on our community. Something like Hurricane Irma cost the city $17 million, and that's what I would consider a least case event, right? That's the least amount that we could expect from a hurricane, and definitely significantly more. As we look at some places around Mexico Beach after Hurricane Michael, if homes are destroyed, there's no more ad valorem value there, so that cripples those communities for a period of time. So trying to get those things prepared for us, so that we can be resilient to bounce back as a community. So just to touch on some pieces here, I'm just going to go through a few things, and we have some community partners that are going to come up and quickly give you some information of what they're doing to help us as a city be prepared for hurricane season. So quickly to review the local state of emergency that's in our city code of ordinances. The city manager has the power, duty, and authority to declare a local state of emergency. But just to clarify some points, when we declare that local state of emergency, it gives the city manager power to do some of these things. It doesn't mean that they automatically go in place. So we can implement emergency plans, make emergency expenditures. We can collect debris. One of the big ones, it doesn't immediately suspend alcohol sales, and it doesn't immediately put a curfew in place. It just gives us the ability to do those things based on the complexity of the specific incident that we have in front of us. So as far as the disaster declaration process, and I know this is a busy slide, but there's a lot that occurs. As soon as that storm comes through, one of our primary goals is going out and doing what we call impact surveys. It's important to get that information as quickly as possible so that we can try and gauge what that impact is to our community, so we can get that information to the county, who can get it to the state, who can get it to the federal government to make emergency declarations. Oftentimes we're seeing that those declarations are being made by the state and even presidential declarations in advance of a storm, but it's important that we do that quickly so that we can maximize our reimbursement as a community. There is a dollar value threshold that we have to meet, so that's why it's important. It's also important that we remember that reimbursement is not 100%. So when we look at some of the expenses that we incur as a city, we won't be getting all of that money back from FEMA or even the state government. Oftentimes, reimbursement takes years to get back. The state of Florida is putting in a new program called FROC, but is trying to get some of that money back quicker. So if we were severely impacted, you could potentially get that, you could expend the funds, get it back, so you could recycle that back into recovery from that incident. But I think Hurricane Charlie, we were still closing out some audit issues from FEMA 10 years after the storm. So these things are not quick. And it's also important that we work on things like the Small Business Administration and individual assistance to help, like I said, businesses and individuals get back on their feet. So that's it's a key focus for us. And then just to also mention, this question we frequently get is, when does emergency services stop as far as when our storms do approach? So when there's a sustained wind of 45 miles an hour, we have put weather stations. This is something new this year. We have 6 weather stations we've strategically deployed across the city. So it's not a gust, it would be sustained winds at 45 miles an hour. There's actually some studies that show at 50 miles an hour it's difficult to actually stand upright. And there's also the debris and the other things that could potentially impact police, fire, public works crews that are going out. So once we shelter in place and those winds subside, what we do from every fire station, they become little community hubs, and we do what's called the first push. So at every fire station, what comes out is a front end loader, a fire truck, and a cop car. And so they push back out, and what we do is we hold any emergency calls that happen during that time. And so we have supervisors and dispatch that will prioritize, we're going to go to somebody having a heart attack before we're going to go to a power line sparking on a palm frond. So that's important. However, in these things, I just want to continue to echo for the community and anybody that when we call for an evacuation, we don't do that lightly. It's because we know that we're going to be reducing some of our service availability, and also for the individuals that need special needs shelters, we want to make sure they get them to the areas that need to get protected. So we're going to run through some of our other community partners, and we're going to start with Ms. Ray from NBC2. Ma'am.
Hi, how are you? Thank you for having me. I'm Allison Ray, the Chief Meteorologist at NBC2. I've been the chief here for about 5 years. Just want to give a little bit of talk about what we're expecting this year. And Chief Lamb kind of took the words out of my mouth, where the hurricane outlooks you do have to take with a grain of salt. Doesn't matter if it's a real active season or a so-called less active season. It all depends on what is headed our way and what type of storm that is and how big it is. Oops, I don't think my slides are in here. I thought that they were. Well, I can kind of wing it here. So we are expecting a very active season. The National Hurricane Center came out with their outlook last year that we are expecting an active season. But think about 2020, the most active season we had on record. That was really not an active season for us here in Southwest Florida, but Louisiana was in the forecast cone 8 times that year. They had 4 hurricanes that year. So just because we had Irma 5 years ago does not mean we're going to wait a couple years for another big storm. We could have 4 big storms this year. We could have 0. So we are calling for an active season up to 21 named storms. There was also seasons, we had a 10-year drought within from 2006 to 2016. That we did not have any major hurricanes make landfall in the U.S. during very active hurricane seasons. So it doesn't matter if we have 30 named storms this year or 5. It depends what heads our way. On average, we get an indirect hit from a tropical storm or a tropical system every 2.5 years. So we're due for some type of hit. On average, we get a hurricane or a direct impact every 8 to 9 years. So once again, that could be any year now. And on average, we get a major hurricane in Southwest Florida every about 16 years. But look at Louisiana just in 2020. They didn't wait 16 years after Katrina. They had 4 hurricanes in 1 year. So I just want to make sure everyone's prepared for what could head our way. And one thing I really tried to mention is that, here in Florida, we get very used to storms headed our way, and everyone really concentrates on the wind speed and the category of that storm. And as Floridians, sometimes we say, oh, it's just a tropical storm or just a category 1. We've seen storms change over the years, especially as our waters get really warm and as our air gets warm. That air can hold more water, and we've seen storms slow down because of how our wind direction and our wind speeds change based on different temperature differences across the globe. So tropical storms and category and hurricanes are starting to move so much slower. Think of Hurricane Harvey, think of Hurricane Dorian. Think of a storm that's only moving 5-6 miles per hour that can dump 20, 30 inches of rain. And that's going to be the more likely scenario that we have to prepare for than a Category 5 hurricane. We're much more likely to see a huge flooding risk due to rainfall than a Category 5 strong storm. I'm sure that will come one day. I hope it doesn't. But we are far more likely to have to deal with significant flooding concerns due to a slow-moving storm producing substantial amount of rain that, frankly, has nowhere to go. So rainfall and storm surge are something we're going to be looking at more likely in the near future, and it's more of a risk. We've seen if you look at the top 10 storms that have produced the most amount of rain from tropical systems, we've cracked the top 10 5 times just within the past 6 years. So getting at least 20 inches of rain from one storm is becoming more and more of an issue that we can see. So I think my slides aren't here, but I just want to reiterate that, it doesn't take 30 storms. It could be 30 storms that all head out into the Gulf or into the Atlantic. It could be 5 storms that all head our way, and we need to be prepared for that. My biggest example is 1992 with Hurricane Andrew. That was a very quiet season, climatologically speaking. There was only 7 named storms that year, just 7. And we waited all the way until August before we had our first named storm, and it was a hurricane, and it was Hurricane Andrew. So when you look at a year that has a strong El Nino and not as warm waters, but we still were able to get Category 5 Hurricane Andrew on Florida's doorsteps, that's something to look at this year. We are expected to have a La Nina, which creates a better environment for these storms to develop, and very warm waters. So we're basically giving the storms all the food and energy that they need to sustain, to be strong storms and powerful storms with rain. If you watch me on NBC2, I'll be talking about rain, rain, rain all the time, especially when it comes to Cape Coral, because we know some areas that have problems with some water drainage. So that's kind of my spiel, and sorry if my slides weren't in there, but we'll be here for you, tracking all the threats and letting you know, even if it's just a tropical storm or a hurricane, exactly what we can expect here, whether it's 3 inches of rain, 20 inches of rain, 20-mile-per-hour winds, 60-mile-per-hour winds. Every storm is going to have those different threats, and we're here to explain that to you guys for you. Thank you.
Ms. Donna Tremaine?
Good morning, Mayor and Council. Donna Germain, President and CEO of the Chamber of Commerce of Cape Coral. We were asked just to share some quick tips on how to better prepare your business for hurricane season, or if the threat of a hurricane is near. Number 1, prepare a plan and practice it. Organize a planning team of key individuals within your business. Test your plan. Educate your team through training, drills, recovery testing, and mock disasters. Your plan is only effective if it can properly be executed. Back up your data. Work with your IT company or IT staff to ensure that backups are performed in a timely manner and that they are stored in a facility that is safe, secure, and dependable. Most of us Most businesses have switched over to the cloud, but in the event that you are still using a server, that is a very good tip for your business information. Protect your site. Protecting your building and equipment is instrumental in continuing or restoring operations in the event of a hurricane. Boarding up windows with shutters or other valuable equipment can protect a building from high-speed flying debris. In the event that you must shut your building or business down temporarily, work with your team to establish shutdown procedures and ensure that they are part of your overall recovery plan. Don't forget to include post-procedures startup to facilitate reoccupation of the site after the storm has moved on. And operate remotely. Inability to access your building is a highly probable occurrence when a hurricane approaches. Roads may be flooded or closed by authorities. Employees may be unable to leave their homes or in a state of emergency may be unwilling to leave their families. It is very important to plan for the scenario, develop a method to operate the critical components of your business remotely. COVID taught us a lot of how to work from home, so many of us have already applied this practice to our day-to-day business and being able to be flexible, whether we're working from home or working out of our building. And technology has allowed us to do this as well. Establish an on-site support plan. Some employers may choose to provide support for their employees' families while the employee is engaged in the community, in business community continuity. Employers can provide transportation, daycare, and lodging to families. Emergency loans, disaster assistance funds, and other financial assistance should be considered for your support personnel. Most importantly, be flexible. Employee support is instrumental to business success. If you provide support to your employees, they will be able to provide support to you and your business should an emergency occur. Implement effective communication strategy. Communications are often important to any business entity. In the event of a pending hurricane, it becomes even more crucial. Communications are needed to coordinate emergency activities, to implement the recovery contingency plan, to warn employees of impending danger, inform families and off-duty personnel of what's happening, and to maintain contact with customers and suppliers. And last, expect the unexpected. Remain flexible and adaptable. You should also remember that the nature of the hurricane will influence your recovery direction. The best defense against unexpected is to prepare, plan, and practice. We've also been working with the EOC in regards to a business resilience virtual dashboard. We learned very quickly through Hurricane Irma and also COVID that there needs to be a place where businesses or residents can go to get the most updated information. So we've been working with the EOC over the last year to develop this dashboard. It will also, we're hoping to have it launched mid to late summer, and it will be a resource for our businesses to not only submit their information in the case of a disaster, but also to get community information so we know the statuses of our businesses and the damages throughout the city. So we're very excited for that to come to fruition. We've worked on it a long time, and so hopefully that will be a good asset to our city as well in communicating in times like this. Thank you.
Mr. Billy Johnson from the CCCIA. I will mention that Mr. Main and Mr. Johnson are both have seats in the EOC that, like she mentioned, as soon as we can get Publix or Ace Hardware or other businesses back open, the quicker our community can recover. And then also, helping those small businesses get the word out that they are back open, or letting them know which contractors are good licensed local contractors.
Thank you, Chief Lamb. Good morning, Mayor, Council, members of staff. Bill Johnson Jr., Executive Director and CEO of the Cape Coral Construction Industry Association. The CCCIA kind of holds two different stands when we are dealing with a storm such as a hurricane. We kind of look at before the storm, during the storm, and after the storm. Before the storm, the CCCIA focuses all its efforts on two things, which you'll see one of them on the slides is informing the residents, making sure their shutters are put up the right way. We did receive calls during Irma with people who needed help, and we put them in touch with people that could help them out and do that. But the most important thing that we do prior to storms, as you all may know, there's a lot of building going on in this city right now. So what we do as an association is we work with the fire department, we work with the police department in order to get with all of our contractor members and members of the construction trade in general to make sure that all of their job sites are completely cleaned up, secured, because as you know, with many storms that come through here, wind is a key factor. Yes, we have the rain, but the last thing that we need on our residents worried about is with a construction site sitting next door to their house, construction debris flying at anywhere from 30, 40, 50 mile an hour plus into their home. So during Irma, for example, we had a very successful push in getting a lot of those job sites cleaned up and maintained so that that would not be an issue. During the storm, we kind of just act and monitor. We do go out after the storm for damage assessment. As Chief Lamb says, we have a seat in the EOC. We work with the Planning Division and the Department of Developmental Services as far as looking at, what can be reopened, what can do that, and what contractors that we can utilize and help get those services open as soon as possible to keep our city moving and not shut down. One of the biggest things that we talk about after the storm, like Chief Lamb said, was utilizing licensed contractors. It's one of the things that I've preached for the years that I've been doing this presentation for the city, is that when you get a storm, say like Irma or like Charlie or like Wilma, that comes through this area and damages people's homes, that's sometimes their most important item that they have. You would be amazed at the amount of people that come out of the woodwork, not even from our area, that do not have a license, that are not qualified to do work in our city, that are looking to prey on these people's fear, look to prey on their situation. And we really work with the community to let people know that if you're going to get work done in your home, make sure that you use a licensed contractor. It's not a hard thing. Most work that needs to be done with a building contractor, they have to have their license number on all of their information that they present to you. Don't go with the guy that just walks up and says, hey, I can fix that. We have a tarp. We can tarp it now. These are the lowest form of people that are out there. They're looking to prey on people and take advantage of the situation. I know the chief does a great job with the police department and policing these areas. We had some issues when the tornado came back years back, that these people come out of the woodwork, and we really strive to let people know that not only use a licensed contractor, but they potentially could have liability, because if you utilize an unlicensed contractor on your home, not only if they get hurt on your property, you as the homeowner are liable for it, but if they do subpar work, some guy says, well, I can fix that electric in your house. You don't need a permit. Don't worry about that. It's a minor repair. And something were to happen to that house and it was to catch fire and burn down. Well, the first thing they're going to do when they do their investigation is check to see if all the proper permits were placed to fix, because they knew there were damage to the house. If there was no damage in that, then there's a good chance that insurance company can deny that claim. I tell people it's not something that you should be terrified of, but be mindful. Always ask to see a license. If they are a licensed contractor and they are properly licensed, insured, they will not have a problem showing that to you. And it really makes all the difference, especially when dealing with the damage and the aftermath of a storm. Thank you.
Good morning. Anthony Sizemore, Police Chief. I'll speak briefly. I'm going over a couple of points that have already been made, but with evacuations and reentry procedures, we do not take it lightly when we call for an evacuation. That's a decision made by Unified Command. And the reason for that, like Chief Lamb said, is we're just simply not able to respond to your location for an extended period of time when those winds get to a certain threshold. We do not have the authority to forcibly or physically remove people during an evacuation. That's a question that comes up oftentimes. However, rather than forcibly removing someone, we just simply tell them we're not able to come and help you during that time. As far as reentry procedures, we do not have a comprehensive plan for checking IDs or denying entry or reentry back into the city. For a city our size, that's really not industry standard. That's something for smaller beach community types with one ingress and egress into a geographical area. We have way too many entry and exit points in the city, and it would be quite a nightmare to be able to police that and have our residents be delayed even further. However, if there is a particular pocket in the city that has sustained a significant amount of damage, we are able to restrict access to a particular area. An example of that would be if the northern end of the city is relatively untouched, say for some power outages, but south yacht club area is underwater, well, we wouldn't shut down or impede access to the entire city. We would be able to effectively do that with a scalpel rather than a chainsaw, if you will. It was also touched upon with curfews and restriction of alcohol sales. That's a unified command decision that oftentimes we will liaison with Lee County EOC and our sister cities in the area. Those are certain decisions that you want to make regionally. An example of that was when COVID happened. If one community closes their beach and the other one keeps it open, you're going to get a large influx of people. Very similar to curfews. You don't want to leave our streets open and then surrounding areas enact a curfew and then people think it's open season on Cape Coral, and we don't do that to our partner cities as well. A lot of those decisions are community-based that our unified command will make. And other than that, we are here open 24/7, just like any other day. We split the operation in half. We have our traditional responding to calls for service when we're back open, and then the other half of our building is in doing all the ancillary and security measures, such as one particular gas station has fuel when others do not. We'll be there to referee customers. There's a truckload of generators coming into Lowe's at 2 o'clock. We'll be there to make sure that it runs orderly, and any other ancillary duty that comes up post-storm and in recovery. So, thank you.
Morning, Mayor and Council. Michael Chisholm, Public Works Director. In advance of a storm, Public Works is out making sure that we have all our fuel lines topped off. We're staffing fire departments. We put multiple personnel in each one with a heavy equipment piece, basically a loader, a pickup truck, and after the storm hits, then Public Works will work with the station that they're deployed at. They determine where that station needs to report to, and they will go out in advance of that that truck or that engine, and they will clear the road for them to make sure they can get to those triage calls in an expeditious manner. We call that first push. So we're actually staging staff from Public Works out in the fire stations with heavy equipment and machinery so that they can respond appropriately. In advance of the storm, the Weir protective measures, we meet interdepartmentally with the fire department and the utilities department. Typically during this time of the year, we're trying to capture water in the canal system, so it's used for irrigation during the dry season. So when a storm is coming and we're in the cone, we're looking at trying to prevent the loss of that resource, but at the same time, we're balancing the decision with flooding. And so as we continue to track the storm as it gets closer to us, we have interdepartmental meetings, and eventually, if we need to, we will pull the weirs, the risers, we will drop the levels in the canals, and that really gives us the capacity to handle the amount of rain that comes from the storms. After the storms go past us, we work on debris management, solid waste, restoring all the facilities, and just bringing everything back up online. Thank you.
Good morning, Mayor, Council. Alvin Henderson, Emergency Management Division Manager. I get the pleasure of reporting out what our emergency management staff has been working on since last season. As you recall, we had a quite extensive report, a after-action report from Irma that had several recommendations in it. We also went through a audit process with the city auditor and looked at our operation in its entirety and worked on updating our plans and procedures to implement a lot of lessons learned from that event, but also we held a functional exercise back on March 1st, testing these new policies and procedures, and still today we're fine-tuning those processes to make sure that we're efficient and effective with our response to not only hurricanes, but any type of incident or event that we would activate the Emergency Operations Center. Some of those actions included the new Community Risk Reduction Specialist already out in the community making some great strides with our at-risk population. For example, he has been out visiting our dialysis centers throughout the city, making sure that they have their plans in place to try to keep that service open to the residents throughout any type of situation that may arise. Likewise, our new emergency management coordinator has been working very closely with all of our department directors, working on continuity of operation plans for each individual department throughout the city as well. So we feel that we've made some great strides in our plans and procedures, and with the help of all the department directors, are better prepared today than what we were last year, and that's always our goal, is that constant quality improvement process. Ideally, what we're looking at is a resilient community. So as you heard from some of our community stakeholders today, we've been deeply engaged with them, trying to make sure that we're providing solid information out to our community. For example, the information that Bill Johnson shared, but also, most importantly to us, also are our small businesses and all businesses actually within the city, to try to make sure that they have plans and procedures in place that they could actually help us by remaining open and providing service to our citizens, visitors within our community. So again, we're using that all-hazard approach, even though today is a kind of a focus on our hurricane season upcoming, but we do look at all threats, all vulnerabilities that face our city, and currently in a process that we're actually updating our community risk assessment. So we're trying to keep all our information very fresh based on current population rate and where we're at as a whole within the community, and then in partnership with Lee County Emergency Management as well. We always say all disasters are local, so it starts and ends with us here within the city, but we do have a very good working relationship with the folks at Lee County Emergency Operations Center, their Emergency Management Division, and also the Florida Division of Emergency Management as we plan. We try to do things and have contracts in place that allow us to be self-sustainable, but also in our time of need, if we would have unmet needs, be able to quickly reach out to our partners, whether it be at the county or state level, to receive that assistance that we would need. One of the things that we looked at very closely was reconstructing, if you will, the Emergency Operations Center, moving away from what we call in the fire and law enforcement services a incident command system structure to what we now refer to as Community Lifeline construct for our Emergency Operations Center. That allows us to pull in all of our departments into the Emergency Operations Center, capitalize on their subject matter areas of expertise that they do, what we call blue sky operation, day in and day out, and how that applies to that emergency that we have faced with, whether it's a hurricane or a storm or any type of event. Through that process, we're working with each of these groups that you see on the screen currently. There's 7 main structures, but it also breaks down into the subsections of each of those groups on providing services that fall in, for example, food, water, and shelter. It's not only looking at providing that capability to our emergency workers, but if there were people in shelters that need assistance with food and water, that we're addressing those needs as well. And it's really truly looking at all the lifelines that make up our community and make it so resilient and a very livable city, if you will. So that's what we're very much focused on, is all those services that are provided to the citizens and the community at large and our area businesses as well, and making that our priority on restoration of those services. Finally, also, the other area that we look at is information sharing and trying to make sure that we're able to share local impact information without any type of national media hype that a lot of times you see within those broadcasts. So what we do with that Emergency Operations Center flash report is when we see that we're in that cone area from that storm system, we will start putting out information that you'll receive through Unified Command on what the local impact thought is, how big, how bad that storm is, and what our stance is prepared to be based on that localized impact. And then that provides you a pretty good snapshot and insight of what we're prepared for, what we're looking at, so we could quickly respond to that storm system, and then most importantly, recover and get the city back into its normal operations. Chief?
Again, thank you, Mayor and Council, for your leadership in this. And I would say from staff's perspective, it's a priority to the city manager. It's a priority to us as the staff that we are all putting our best foot forward towards this. We are making strides every year to get better. And it does take an entire community to prepare for one of these storms, which is why we're engaging so many community stakeholders. So if you guys have any questions, happy to answer.
Thank you, Chief. I'll open up to Council. Councilmember Hayden.
Yeah, Chief, one group I'm surprised we didn't have here today was LCEC and their plans for getting us up with power, because that's obviously a major concern for people. Certainly was with Charlie, certainly was with Wilma, Irma. Can you kind of lay out for people the grid prioritization and how it works? And if I know they brought in crews from other areas to assist us when we've had those storms, can you kind of update us on what their plan would be?
Sure. So Ms. Trish Lassiter from LCEC does have a seat in the EOC as one of those community lifelines that is very important to us. We know power is there. We're trying to be a little mindful of time, so they didn't have much new this year that they were working through, but we certainly integrate well with them. We have GIS maps. We're trying to go as digital as possible, especially for mapping, because as soon as we print out a map or draw on a map, it changes and it's out of date. And so we're going digital there so we can see and track those. I believe individuals at home can even see where some of those things are. But there is prioritization. Obviously, we want to get power restored to the hospital or power restored to some of that critical infrastructure, water plants, those other things as quickly as possible. So there is a prioritization that they go through. And then they also go out and look at how can they affect the most residents at once? And also some of this is if it's as simple as going to flip a breaker versus having to replace lines, some of those things take additional time. So we work closely with them. Again, Trish is there in the EOC, and we talk very frequently when we have those outages because it is a large priority. Especially, these time of the year that we get these storms, it's very hot. Air conditioning just isn't a comfort. A lot of times, especially for the elderly population, it's a health need. But everything from that to helping oxygen machines run, it's very important. Just like utilities for making sure we get potable water and sewage taken care of. Those are key infrastructure pieces that we certainly work with and work closely with.
And my other question was, obviously, of a city over 200,000, I think we have access to one shelter. Is that correct?
Yes, so shelter availability is a statutory authority of the county. And so one of the things that we advocate and we work with them on, out of the 200,000 people, as you'd mentioned, Island Coast High Schools are only recognized and approved shelter. That's 3,000. They'll push in extra and go up to 3,300. But you're approaching almost 1 million people in Lee County, and I think there's shelter availability for less than 40,000.
So then how do we handle it? Because obviously accessibility to shelters on the other side of the river is a lot easier than what it might be here. In the event that a storm is imminent and evacuation leaving the city may not necessarily be an issue, are we encouraging people to go to one of those other shelters? Are we encouraging them to stay in there? How do we work it when somebody really wants to go to a shelter, but their life could be in danger when they get on the road?
Well, if I can, I'll back up just a little bit to the beginning of that. And so we would encourage everybody in advance of a storm to have a family plan. What's going to work best for you and your family. After Hurricane Irma, which was the largest U.S.-based evacuation in U.S. history, because it was East Coast, West Coast, there were so many people. It put such a huge demand on infrastructure, right? We had highways that were packed. We had limited fuel supplies. And so the adage that we're across the entire state is being used is run from the water, hide from the wind. So really, historically, as we look back on the almost 100 years of storm data, storm surge is what kills people. And so we're asking people, if you're in that storm surge evacuation area, to get out of that area. Now, that doesn't mean you need to go to Maine. We just need to get you a little bit away from the coast. And so whether they be friends or family, or being able to get a hotel room, I know what's one of my family's plans is to look at, depending on the track of the storm, either going to Fort Lauderdale or Palm Beach County or going up to Orlando, depending on which way the storm's kind of looking. Shelters are good. They provide a place for people to go. However, I would say they are a life raft, not a cruise ship. You're going to get a cot and a duct tape square on a gym floor. You're not going to get a lot of those other pieces. And so we do work with Palm Beach County or Broward County so that they can do host sheltering for individuals that need to go there. But shelter limited space is not, again, from Collier County, Lee County, Charlotte County, everybody in our coast has this challenge because we don't have a lot of large infrastructure outside of that surge zone. So it is certainly a challenge. One of the things that we do look at, and it's not something that we like to advertise, but it is something that we will do our best to look at, is if we advertise where those evacuations are occurring. But I remember vividly having calls 4 hours before impact with a individual in their 90s living south of Cape Coral Parkway that saw the track of the storm and is now scared. And so that's difficult. If we can do it safely, we will go remove that person, and then we open up what's called last resort shelters. And so we don't like doing that. The school board doesn't like us cutting the locks off of a school and sticking people in there. But certainly when there's a life threat and we have the ability to try and save or protect a life, we will take extreme measures to save life.
Thanks. Thanks, Mayor.
Thank you. Councilmember Tate.
Thank you. Can we, or do we have a list of all the shelters posted on our website? And can we start digital, or whatever they call that, social media presence on shelters so we have them available, as well as places that they can take their pets, dogs, cats, and birds? I know in Irma, we had a real problem with that. And I know we don't have shelters, so any suggestions, and if you can, if you can do it on social media, that would help a lot. And Billy, I have a question for you. Seawalls is always a problem in these big storms. Is it possible that you can work through your industry and educate people on what they should be looking at their seawalls now, if there's anything they can do to protect them during this, prior to us having a storm? I know there's not barriers, but for people that might have little cracks or things that they need to be aware of, because it was such a huge problem when they backwashed in Irma. So if there's anything your industry can do to help the homeowners, and Donna through the chamber as well, I think that would be a caution that we never really remember to look at. So thank you. Thank you for the information.
I could just mention to the shelter piece. So on capecoralfire.com/emergency management, there's a know your zone, so you can type in your address and it will tell you which evacuation or storm surge zone you're in. So that's a tool that's there. The Lee County All Hazards Guides, which we will reference on our department and city social media, has the list of those shelters. And all Lee County shelters are pet friendly now. It includes, in addition to snakes, or to dogs,
Birds.
cats, birds,
Birds,
it does
yeah.
include snakes and
Yeah, good.
llamas, which is some of the ones that we had.
Hey,
So
all inclusive.
yeah, it's like Noah's Ark. But so we have those. And I would also mention, again, for special needs folks, if you need power for oxygen machine, get in contact early so we can get you pre-registered for a special needs shelter. There is special pre-registration for some of those individuals with special
And I
needs.
have had that with LCEC, and they were kind enough to bring out small little portable generators for people that were in those emergency situations. I know you just rattled off that website, but it's so difficult for someone in an emergency to go, oh wait, what was that website? That's why I'm asking, quick, concise, little thing we can share on social media, stick it on your refrigerator as a magnet, so we have it, so when somebody needs one, they're not going to remember that site. And they're not going to have the Lee County All Hazards Guide, to guarantee you. They're going to call their council people and say, where do we go? So we need the cheat sheet as well.
Yes, ma'am. And just to mention that as well, as with the city manager creating the community communications division here within the city,
Right.
we have integrated that into the EOC. We'll change the billboards. There'll be one repository for all information so we can share correct and timely information. And we would ask the council members to do the same to help echo that same information so we're putting out consistent, accurate, and timely information.
Yeah, that's really a benefit, having that communications department. Thank you, thank you.
Councilmember Shepherd?
Yeah, I wanted to bring up something a little different. As you know, if a resident wants to buy like a lawn shed or something like that to put in their yard, that we have regulations for them to be secured to the ground so they don't become a hazard in a hurricane and blow around the city and destroy property. What I've noticed as a council person is we have two large retailers, Lowe's and Home Depot, that they have an area designed in their building for extra product storage. They've literally turned them areas into retail sections, and now their parking lots became their storage lot. What I'm worried about is I've counted 5 to 6 different style sheds in their parking lots. What were to happen if we had an emergency? Do they have the ability to get them sheds and put them inside their building? I don't think they do have the ability because, like I said, they've turned them areas into retail areas. And they have so much excess product in their parking lots, it's become an eyesore. I've seen products stacked in areas that are painted for fire, that they're not supposed to put anything at all, that they're supposed to be open for emergency situations. So I just wanted to know if we are acting on that. And there could possibly be other commercial businesses as well throughout the city that might have dangerous situations on their property that I don't know about. I'm just pointing out two that I've noticed at Lowe's and Home Depot. Thank you.
So certainly as it relates to the fire code, I know this is an issue that the fire inspectors are working on to make sure that individuals are complying with the fire code. Also, development services, code compliance is going to go work with those folks as well to make sure they comply with any codes. As it relates to hurricane preparation, we have a relationship with those businesses. We'll make sure that that is a point that we bring up and talk with them about because we are trying to reduce the risks of any of those other projectiles possibly being out in that community. So we want to limit that risk as much as possible.
Thank you.
Councilmember Long?
Yeah, thank you. And thank you for this information. I know Councilmember Tate touched on it, but I think equally as important as having all these plans and policies in place is disseminating it to the public. So I was hoping maybe to hear from communications, but it sounds like some of that stuff was touched. I think it's important to make sure, and I think we would have some sort of resource, some page on the website that directs everything and condenses everything in an easy to read fashion. And one question that I had with regards to that page is we had ULI come through and give their report at the a few days ago now, and one of the things that they talked about was resiliency, and there was a comment that was made with regards to mitigation and preparedness that for every, I believe it was $1 that was spent, saved up to like 5 or 6 in recovery. So if we don't have that sort of thing on a page like that, as far as a disaster recovery page, I think it would be important that we make sure that we put that sort of thing in that information. That would be year-round. Obviously, it wouldn't be as pertinent in the eye of a storm, but something to have available, something as simple as, I believe, bracing the tie beams on an older home, increased the wind resistance a certain amount. That sort of information would be important. And then another thing that I've seen municipalities have, and I'm not sure whether we have it or not, is they've utilized for their disaster pages a live GIS mapping with regards to like asset. I think you had touched that you might have something similar on the fire page, but to Councilmember Tate's point, I think it would be important to link that directly onto the city's website as well. You know, in the frenzy of the storm, it's not likely that a resident's going to go to the fire page. You know, in particular, I would imagine having everything in one place would be important. So something like that with maybe high-risk areas, flood mapping. I know that we have that in some form or another, but if it's not condensed or consolidated, I would maybe look into that as well.
So just to comment on a couple of things. So this, every year we do a hurricane kickoff. The last 2 years we've done it, obviously with COVID was difficult. We tried doing a virtual one. We had very poor attendance last year, so we thought that we could do it as kind of knock out two birds with one stone. We had about a similar resident attendance in today's meeting as our previous ones. So we do get around to the new residents club. We go out to the Chamber of Commerce luncheon, all these other places to try and push out this message this time of year. When we do end up with a storm, if we're going to set up something like that, it'll probably be, we're working with communications, so it'll be capecoral.gov/hurricane, whatever that name is, and that'll go up on the billboards, and that'll be where we put out that information, so that there is one repository. So wherever you go to, if it's I think we've got it even set up, so as soon as you go to whatever that website is, even if you go to capecoral.gov or capecoralfire.com, it pushes you directly to that splash page. But we'll continue to make sure we're almost kind of running it like a blog where the most information is given daily, but there's some history. Trash collection seems to be one of the hot topics as we get there before the storm, and then even afterwards what we do with debris. And if you will, I'll have Alvin touch briefly on the GIS map that we're trying to put together so that people can see some of that real-time information. Because like I said, as soon as you put out a PDF of a map, the information changes, and it happens very quickly. But everything from power outages to where we have boil water notices, those are all things that are already live on GIS. We can just need to get that pushed out so that community can see that.
Thank you, Chief. And we do have two GIS analysts that are to report to the Emergency Operations Center when we activate, and we do pull that information into a GIS map. We use a program called Crisis Track that allows us to track any road closures, and we also use that during the first push that you heard from the Public Works Director, that as we start to open those streets, that will be indicated on a GIS map that is part of our response out of the Emergency Operations Center, let alone any type of road closures or water situations. I know the Utilities Department uses GIS mapping very heavily for those type of notifications as well. That is all pulled into different map layers that we could display through the GIS analyst that's in the Emergency Operations Center, through our social media pages, and the main page for the city for that event.
Thank you. Councilmember Nelson.
Thank you, Mayor. My comment question is for Mike. In terms of solid waste, I know you had mentioned solid waste, and I'm just thinking back in 2017 when we all experienced Irma, and I know that it was very challenging for us to get outside contractors to come in and pull the solid waste because we had Harvey in Houston. We had a myriad of storms that season in different parts of the Southeast. And so I just wanted to talk a little bit about in terms of our preparedness for the solid waste collection, because we've had challenges with it, obviously, with our current vendor. And I know that in 2017, the city went out and tried to find outside vendors, but we kept missing them because they kept going to other parts of the country. So what is in terms when you talk about solid waste and the cleanup after, can you just expound a little bit upon that plan and how we intend to line up other contractors and vendors to come in?
Yeah, so within the past couple of weeks, our new solid waste manager attended the Governor's Hurricane Conference, made some new connections there, both at the state level and with vendors. We're looking at trying to find ways to get not just the large companies in, but also some of the smaller companies. And one of the initiatives that we're looking at is permitting additional sites as staging areas, so that we can utilize them in a more localized area, as opposed to having to do transport all throughout the city. So that's one initiative we're taking. As back then, Public Works staff ended up doing the collection work on the major roads, because the limited amount of private sector people that came, they wanted to focus just on the local roads where they didn't have to set up MOT, didn't have to have chase trucks. So we, as Chief Lamb said, there's no perfect event, never been to one. And so we learned a lot of things on how to work with the industry during that event. And if need be, we'll utilize those again this time. But we're building upon that to try and have like I said, more localized staging areas versus large consolidated ones. And, you know, just having those vendors in your phone, right? So if the ones that you have contracts with can't make it, but the ability to call somebody else and bring them in is, you know, the things that Terry's working on, trying to make connections with as many people as possible so that we have those opportunities and they're out there.
Yeah, I think that's smart in terms of the variety and the vendor size, because I just remember the lots on Skyline that were just piled high with debris and became kind of a dumping ground free-for-all for all sorts of things beyond storm debris. So thank you.
If I can just add to that.
Yeah.
So one of the things when Hurricane Irma happened, we didn't have great contracts in place as a city. We were asking people to come help us. What we have done now as a city is we have gone out and we have we have primary, secondary, tertiary. I think we're up to 6 or 7 contractors. And so now when we call them, we're not calling to say, hey, can you come help us? We are saying we are activating your contract. You have to come or you're in breach. And so that was one of the things when we went through with those individuals to make sure that they had the availability. I don't want to hear you got a big contract in Miami-Dade or wherever and you're not coming here. You're coming or you're in breach. And so there's damages associated with that. And so we made sure that that was something that we put into place to make sure we could do that. Now, in addition to just the debris hauling, where they're at, of making sure we have contractors come in and do the tipping and the grinding to make sure that we have, that's where a bulk of our expense comes in, taking care of that, primarily horticulture debris.
While you're talking about tipping and grinding, I might as well mention another thing that we're looking at. So routinely, Public Works generates horticultural debris just from trimming trees on the right-of-way, vegetative, cleaning out swales, cleaning canal banks. And about 2 years ago, instead of grinding and then tipping that waste to the landfill, we brought in a burn box, permitted it through the fire department, went very well, basically reduced everything down to a pile of ash, and we had no complaints. So at the hurricane conference, we also got with the DEP, and we looked at the possibility of utilizing a burn box or air curtain box, they call it, for hurricane debris. And so we've gotten material on that. So that will greatly reduce the amount of piles that you recall, and also we'll be able to cut down on the cost as well. Right. Because when you pay by the ton, all of that stuff is soaking wet. There's a lot of water weight, and that water weight goes into the landfill, and you're paying by the ton. Right. Whereas if you incinerate with a burn box, it's all natural. There's no painted materials, no art, no man-made materials. Only the vegetative stuff, it gets burned up. So it gets oxidized. The box creates enough heat to where it's basically smokeless operation. So we're looking at exploring that possibility to reduce the amount of horticultural piles throughout the city after an event and reduce the cost for the restoration.
Good. Well, I'm grateful to hear that we are so proactive, so thank y'all very much. I know there's another hurricane training, if you will, offered through the TDC in a couple of weeks, so I'll be attending that as well, but this is great information. Thank you. Thank you, Mayor.
Councilmember Tate?
Just one final question, Mike. Do we need a permit for that box that you did?
So we've utilized the burn box for our own public works operations a few years ago, and it was permitted through the fire department. There has to be a licensed, state licensed fire official that is on site during the use of it. As far as if your question is specific to the hurricane, that's what we're doing all that research right now. We just picked up information regarding that. There was a memo, I think, sent out by the DEP within the last month about the possibility of using them and certifying them. So it's an active research project we have going on right now. So I don't know. It may be permitted as part of our larger disposal sites, or it may be permitted as individual use. So I just don't have that answer at this point, but okay. I'll get it.
Thank you.
Yes, and first I'd like to thank all the presenters here this morning to bring us up to speed on our preparedness in case there is an event here in our city. And I think what I've gotten out of this presentation that I want to make sure that our residents hear is, just like we have a formalized plan, we ask that each resident in the city to have a formalized plan for their family as well. And I think when you take a look at that, our responsibility here at the city, I like our communications department to have a specific spot in our capecoral.gov webpage that they can go to for educational information at this time, some of the things that may help them formalize that plan. And also that same webpage can revert into an information page in the event that we do have a hurricane here coming towards us. So we want to get them into practice to go into the same spot is the point that I'm trying to make. First, it will be for informational purposes, for educational purposes, and then it will go automatically into informational purposes if we have an event here in our city. And if we can get them into that practice, they know exactly where to go to get that information. So hopefully our communications department, Mr. City Manager, you could possibly make that happen because as we all know, having a plan is going to be the best for everyone, no matter if it's us here at the city or the families that reside here in the city. An evacuation plan, that plan needs to be if we're staying here, and that plan needs to be if we have to evacuate. And I think that two-prong approach, because many of those variables are different from one to the other, so having that plan in place is crucial in the time if we had a catastrophic event coming towards our city. So thank you for the presentation, and I know I look forward to the educational component for our residents.